Hello and welcome to our Making Intimate Performance Artist Talk, which has been kindly funded by Arts Council England and co-hosted by Contact Theatre and Islington Mill. I'm Mike Pony. I'm currently trying to speak and let people into this meeting at the same time, which is complicated. So I'm the director of Submerge, and here are a few housekeeping rules for today's event. Please keep your sound on mute. You're welcome to keep your camera off. You can turn it on during the Q&A if you'd like to. Please keep in mind that the event is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube following the talk. The event is being BSL interpreted by Paul Mancini, who you should be able to see pinned on your screen. I will be moderating a Q&A session with each artist after they've spoken, and also a group Q&A. So if you'd like to comment or ask any questions, please use the chat window during the event, and Pelin from Contact will get your questions over to me. If you have a technical issue, there's some messages in the chat about how to contact Pelin. So have a look over there if you need to ask us any questions or have a technical issue. As I said, I'm Mike from Submerge. Submerge is a queer-led UK arts producing organisation and festival, supporting artists who make visceral, cross-disciplinary arts experiences that merge performance, music and creative technology. We've presented 2 festivals of intersectional international art in Bristol in 2016 and 2019, supported by Arts Council England. We work with artists who make artistic experiences that are difficult to define by genre, and our favourite work combines live art, body-based performance, immersive theatre, dance, sound, club performance, electronic music, audiovisual and digital practice in surprising configurations. And watching Paul keep up with that is great. In 2021, we are working to transition the organisation to its new home in Manchester, and we're working with local artists and communities to create opportunities for audiences to engage with cutting-edge contemporary arts. Just going to let a few more people in. So about this talk, as an organisation, Submerge hopes to help shape a more inclusive sector, and we take a specific focus on amplifying the work of queer, trans and non-binary and gender fluid makers and performers. As such, we have a number of commissions coming up which are focused on engaging diverse and early career artists and supporting them to make new work and experiment in new forms. So the purpose of this talk is not only to introduce our audiences to the work of 3 brilliant artists making intimate performance, but also to inspire Northwest artists working in drag, cabaret and performance to consider applying to work with Submerge and artist Jo Bannon to conceive and trial a new live COVID-safe one-to-one or intimate performance. And we'll talk a bit more about that after we've heard from our artists. So I'm just going to let a few more people in. Here we go. And then we're going to start, we're going to launch straight in with an introduction to Rosana Cade. Rosana is a Glasgow-based artist who mainly works in live performance. Their practice is rooted in a queer feminist discourse and straddles performance, live art and activism. They're drawn to liveness as a potent site for connection with an other, and their work often dances between the joy and difficulty of connecting intimately with others. They create work in a range of forms and contexts to reach different people with varying approaches, and they're passionate about collaborative practice. And I'd just like to invite Rosana to turn their camera on. I'm gonna unspotlight me and spotlight Rosana. So Rosana, over to you.
Great, thanks Mike. Hi everyone, it's really nice to be here and to be connected with Jo and Tania, who are both people that I find very inspiring. But yes, about me, I identify as a queer artist. For me, queerness is about rebelling passionately against societal norms which constrain the boundaries of your existence, celebrating fiercely all those who are under-celebrated, and experimenting wildly with imaginative new ways of doing, being, looking, thinking, acting, seeing, making. I am non-binary, and this goes beyond gender for me. I try to embody and work with fluidity, unfixedness, the spaces in between, the potential for change, multiplicity, endless possibility. And as Mike said, I work across different contexts and the form of my work varies, emerging in relation to the process or inquiry I'm working with. And as a queer artist, I question my role. Am I creating work or experiences for my queer community to feel represented, affirmed, safe, to learn about ourselves, to bolster the subculture, to be free to experiment and grow? Or is my role to reach out beyond that community, to create work and opportunities for exchange with different people, to facilitate greater understanding and a more empathetic society? And of course, as a non-binary person, I don't place these drives at opposite ends of a spectrum. I recognise they can both be sliding around on top of each other. I think something that is true in most forms of my work is that I like to give audiences direct live experiences that place them in positions they wouldn't normally find themselves in, like singing along to a giant labia lip-syncing mouth, receiving a lap dance, or holding hands with a stranger. Rather than sitting and watching something from a distance, I like to invite audiences to get close, to be part of the action. In this way, I think live performance can expand the boundaries of our lives, move us into new realms of possibility, and open up space and capacity for wider understanding of ourselves and each other. And this excites me, and I think there's lots of potential for this in one-on-one work. I've made 2 intimate performance pieces, which have been touring internationally over the past 10 years, that I'm going to talk about. The first is Walking Holding, a performance where one audience member at a time is led on a walk through the town or city on a carefully crafted route and invited to hold hands with a series of different strangers, one after the other. It normally lasts around 40 minutes and you meet about 7 different people. And these people that you walk and hold with are a group of local participants who have different identities and different experiences of the city. I lead them on a process in order to take part in the work. Walking Holding is partly about experiencing your town from someone else's perspective, illuminating the ways in which our identity can affect our experience of different spaces. It's also a gentle call for connection between strangers, asking what happens when we open our hands to each other in public. I first created it in 2011, 10 years ago, and I've since toured it to over 40 locations across the UK, Europe and Hong Kong, working with local people in each place. When I first created the work, I was responding to my own experiences of same-sex handholding and the complex tussle between visibility and vulnerability, public and private intimacy, activism and fear. I was interested in the distance between perceived equality through legislation and the reality of people's lived experiences. I began doing some experiments, walking and holding hands with different people, and I became fascinated by the multiple ways in which our identities, including race, gender, age, disability, class, and our personal history or relationship with certain places affect our experience of public space. As if we're all carrying around personal psychogeographic maps in our heads, constantly being etched with new memories as we move through the urban landscape. For some, this can mean very real physical barriers that don't allow them to enter particular places. For others, the barriers are psychological or maintained by the unknown crowd. Some feel totally invisible who want to be seen. Others feel too seen, at risk, in danger. I became compelled by the idea that we share the same places with hundreds of people every day living in urban environments, but may all be having a different experience. So I created Walking Holding with the desire to start to share and understand some of these differences. Initially, I was very much thinking about the relationship between the pair and the city, the relationship between the pair of people walking and the public, who become a kind of unknowing secondary audience for the work. I sometimes like to think of it as a subtle pride march, meaning an area will be infiltrated with queer pairings over the days that it happens without any explanation. But there's another interaction which is equally significant in the work, and that is the intimate relationship formed between the audience member and the performer. In different places with different people, these two dynamics resonate in different ways. For many, opening themselves up to hold and be held with a stranger seems intimidating. It can feel vulnerable, exposing. You have to let go of control and allow a stranger to cross the border of touch. We often talk about different cultural codes surrounding touch and intimacy, and how some of these ideas have been inscribed into us as natural, but vary greatly depending on where you were brought up. It is a rare experience to be so close to a stranger, to allow yourself to be led and to be given their undivided attention. Audience members are told before beginning that they can speak with the people they meet. There is no script, and it's also fine if they want to be silent. The space this opens up can sometimes create moments of deep connection or profound conversation, with people feeling able to reveal things about themselves they wouldn't tell a close friend. There's something freeing in the structure of the work, in the moments of ephemeral intimacy which have clear boundaries. It is an opportunity for the audience member to be who they are in that moment with someone who has no prior knowledge of them and whom they will probably never see again. The most common response to the project is one of joy, connection, liberation. In our competitive capitalist culture that teaches us to devalue our ties to each other in order to succeed and to mistrust strangers, walking holding gives you an experience of walking through your town and imagining everyone as a potential handholder or companion. And this aspect of the work is hugely important to me. Whilst it is about highlighting our differences, our privileges, our subjectivity, it's also about connecting through handholding to a shared humanity and bringing attention to our interdependence, turning strangers into fellow humans and enlarging our capacity for empathy and connection. And we're living in a time of mental health crisis and an epidemic of loneliness, only heightened by the current pandemic. Feels like a ripe context for creating intimate one-on-one work, which can offer nourishment with its crafted out time for focused attention on another person. But I think the format also has potential to be very provocative and illuminates the subjective position of the individual audience member. Another intimate performance I've toured, called My Big Sister Taught Me This Lap Dance, involves me performing in a small booth the lap dance my sister used to perform in strip clubs. Whilst I'm the one revealing my naked body to the audience member, it is usually them who feels the most exposed, aware of their gaze, of where they choose to look and what that says, increased awareness of their gender in relation to mine, their age. The close-up, intimate format allows for an all-encompassing, multi-sensorial experience, but it also means the audience member becomes part of the performance, that I am watching them just as they are watching me. They are implicated, losing the freedom and anonymity one feels sitting watching a piece of theatre in the dark in a seating bank. In the second half of the performance, they're taken out of the booth and invited to listen to a recording of my sister talking about her experiences and her relationship to me, whilst watching through a small hole in the wall the next audience member receiving their dance. This opportunity to watch again from this perspective serves to reveal the construction of the perceived intimacy and frees the audience member to gaze without scrutiny. I sometimes see one-to-one work as being a bit like an experiment where there's a set process or action and the variable is the audience member. And because the audience member makes up half of the components, who they are and how they react has a huge influence on the outcome, meaning the performance really is a live encounter with multiple possibilities. As I said at the beginning, I like to put audience members in live situations they wouldn't normally find themselves in, to challenge their assumptions, discover things about themselves, and understand other people's positions from a new perspective. In one-to-one work, you're placing an audience member directly into a situation, and often they're required to participate in some way, or they recognize their presence and gaze as a form of participation. I'm interested in live performance as an opportunity for practicing participation, for implicating individuals in each other's struggle, because this is how I would like us to be in the wide world, active participators rather than passive viewers. And that's the end of my talk.
Thanks, Rosana. So now I'm going to invite anyone who has a question to ask questions in the chat. We've got a couple of minutes just per artist, and then we're going to do a group Q&A. I have a question to start, which is, so this work is unusual in intimate performance practice or one-to-one in that it takes place in public. So to what extent does having an external audience affect the work, and what systems do you have in place for managing audience reactions to the work and keeping the artist and the participants safe?
Yeah, well, I think issues around safety are kind of at the core of this work and also what it's trying to explore. And for me, when I was creating that project, I'd been making a lot of work around sexuality and gender that happened inside art spaces, and I was really feeling an urge to go out into the public realm, because I felt in those spaces they felt quite safe. But you know, at that time, not many queer people I knew felt comfortable in the city centre of Glasgow. So yeah, so obviously it has a huge impact on the work, and it would just be a very different thing if it wasn't happening outside. Obviously, then when you're working in the public space, it becomes completely unpredictable and uncontrollable what's going to happen in the city and what people are doing. And actually, the first time we ever did it, on the second night it was going to be on, there was a football match in the city, and it was St. Patrick's Day, and they said we couldn't go ahead with the performance that night because it wouldn't be safe. And that, I found that that just got me going, because I was like, well, all we're asking people to do is walk and hold hands. And, you know, what do people who have minority identities do in this situation? Do we just cancel our lives for an evening? And that kind of made me think I really want to do this piece quite a lot. But yeah, obviously you have to be careful as well. And I mean, the main kind of safety things that we have in place is like everyone has a phone, and there's a system so that if anything happens, they know they can phone this number and someone will come. But different venues have approached it differently, and some people have, you know, wanted security guards out on the route and things like that. So yeah, it kind of depends on the place, and if there's people who feel vulnerable being out in public, we make sure they have someone with them so that they're never waiting on their own. Because if you're a performer in the work, you walk with the audience member, but then you walk back on your own and you're waiting on your own, and that can actually be more vulnerable for some people. Yeah.
Thanks. And in the chat, Ellie is asking, Ellie's just disappeared. Do you have a specific process you follow when you create your performances?
Oh, I wish I did, because then I'd know what I'm doing. I feel like, as I was sort of saying, the process of making the work, like I never know what the end thing is going to be necessarily. So the form kind of emerges from the thing that I'm interested in. I'd say, you know, the work always begins with some kind of inquiry, and I really like collaborating with other people. But sometimes it'll be like lots of just sitting and researching and thinking and writing, and then the idea will come. Or sometimes it's more like being in a studio, and I make sort of experimental theatre stuff with my partner Ivor, and we do a lot of improvising and things like that. It kind of feels like it's a different process for each project, which isn't very useful, but I never know what to say when someone says, what is your process? I suppose kind of being a bit instinctual. I don't know.
There's quite a few questions coming through. I'm only going to have time to pick maybe one of them or two, but we can talk more in the Q&A with everybody afterwards. So some of these things coming up are around consent as part of your work, and to what degree people know will happen. I think that would be a really interesting one to talk about in the group chat. And Pelin is asking, could you talk a bit more about joy in public spaces and what it means for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's so important to talk about joy, and I think Walking and Holding has a lot of joy inscribed in it. I think when I first created it, I was kind of thinking about, you know, that there's prejudice out there, and wanted to almost like give people this, showing what the barriers are. But actually what happens with Walking and Holding is that people come and they're quite nervous about doing it, and then what emerges is a really joyful experience where you're just meeting these strangers and they're being open to you. And I think kind of doing something that you feel a bit scared of and then discovering it to be kind of fine can be very joyful. And I think we all have the right to express our joy in public, and sort of really passionate about working towards that and helping people feel able to be themselves. I think feeling like you can be true to yourself when you're out in public is a lot of tied up in joy. But yeah, joy means so many things to me. I'm also just thinking about dancing and wearing really great clothes and yeah,
All
just
the things
loving
we
yourself.
can't do in a pandemic.
Yeah.
So I'm super aware. I hate those Zooms where they just go on and on. So I would really love the people who've asked questions to keep your questions until the next Q&A. But for now, I'm just going to move on to our next artist, which is Jo Bannon. So if you just bear with me a moment, I'm going to unspotlight Rosana. I'm going to just find. So Jo Bannon is a UK-based artist working in performance, choreography, and live art. She also works as a dramaturg, educator, and writer, and she's a founding member of artist collective Residents. Jo's work is concerned with identity, sensory perception, and human encounters, and explores how our physical bodies experience the world around us and how this sensory experience can or cannot be conveyed. Her work is informed by her identity as a disabled woman with albinism and attempts to unpick the ways we look, hear, and sense our immediate environment in order to rethink or make unfamiliar these intrinsic human behaviors. Jo's performances often manifest as intimate encounters designed for single or small audiences alongside staged theatre work and installations. And Jo is a good friend of mine because we both lived for a very long time in Bristol. So I'm just going to spotlight Jo, get rid of myself. And yeah, thanks, Jo. And over to you.
Great. Thanks, Mike. I think that your one-to-one back in the day when you made work was probably the first one I ever saw. So that shows how old we are. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. I hope that has worked.
Yep, that worked.
Great. Yeah, and thanks, Rosana. It was so interesting hearing you speak about those works. It made me realise, I mean, in this time where we can't be in performance or see performance, it makes me realise that hearing about you talk about those works makes me completely situate where I was and how I felt in both of them in a different way, I think, than if I remember seeing a work in a theatre. So that's really joyful right now when we're starved of that. I'm going to jump straight in and talk about two pieces of one-to-one work that I've made. The first is Exposure and the second is a work called Deadline. And I've got some images. And I'm going to read my notes that I wrote and now can barely see because my eyes get tired the later we go. So forgive me if I falter a bit. So the first work I'm going to talk about is Exposure, which I made in maybe 2010. Yeah, I still continue to perform this work. I kind of call it the show that will never die. So it was the first one-to-one that I made. And I guess the first thing I'd say is that it wasn't intentional that I was aiming to make a one-to-one work. I went on a residency and one of the residency gave you certain prompts and one of the prompts was be direct. And up until that point, I'd never worked with autobiography in my work or my identity as a woman with albinism or as a disabled woman, kind of on purpose or stubbornly because I felt cautious of a kind of potential exoticization that was going on in live art practice at that time, in my opinion. And so I went on this residency and then the idea for the work was just kind of naggingly present because I was thinking a lot about vision and how we see and how we look at each other and how different that is to seeing each other. And I guess that's directly informed by my experience in the world of having very low vision, so not being able to see the world or others so well, but having contradictorily a very highly visible presence in the world. So I really stand out in a crowd. And so I was thinking about this difference between looking and being seen, and thinking about shyness or like wanting to make a one-to-one where I could level the playing field of visibility somehow. And I started thinking about eye examinations. like at the opticians, and how, I mean, I've been having eye exams all my life, and how when I was a small child, they were these kind of intensely charged spaces that you'd go into this room, they'd turn off all the lights, you'd be with a stranger and they'd kind of look into your eyes. And so in my mind, exposure is kind of my ode to the eye examination. So I'm going to briefly describe what happens in the work. So you arrive at the space and you're led by torchlight into a completely dark room. You're seated on a chair at a table. You probably don't yet know that I'm opposite you. You might sense me. And then the first thing you receive or see is a hand holding out a pair of earbuds. And you listen through that audio to a narrative. It's kind of one of my most narrative works, about a kind of, conversation I'm having with myself about looking and being seen, about how eyes function, and I guess this external, this external experience of being seen through the eyes of others, so people on the street. And so mostly the work happens in complete darkness, except for a few moments of exposure or illumination where a light comes on and you're allowed to look at something. So the image now is I shine a pen torch onto my eyeball, onto my iris, and invite you to look in. And for me, this work was working a lot with control, and using a kind of intimate space where you're allowing someone to really look at you, but you're orchestrating and controlling exactly how and when they can look at you through the light. This image is part of the performance where I shine the light on a very old photograph that I found of me, my mum and my sister, taken by a medical researcher. And the point of the study was to depict, how similar or dissimilar I look to my sibling and my mum. When I say I didn't intend to make a one-to-one, I think often I'm working in a kind of circular way between content or idea and then searching for the form of it. And so thinking about looking led to this idea of the eye exam, and then it felt logical that it had to be one other person, because that exchange of gaze is perhaps most unavoidable when there's two people looking at each other. It's also the first time I ever thought about access in my work, because I guess a lot of my work is informed by disability, in that I'm interested in how differently we experience the world, based on loads of factors, but one of those factors being the kind of limits or edges of our body and our senses. So later on in developing this piece, I really thought about how this piece of work worked for non-sighted audiences, non-hearing audiences. And I think there's a real kind of opportunity in one-to-one work, because it's different for each person each time, to really think about how you can make a work bespoke to that audience member and their needs. The next piece I'm going to talk about is Deadline. So Deadline at its heart is a performance installation which centres around a live phone call that the audience member has with one specialist who works in the field of death and dying. This work came out of this idea of trying to answer what I call the 4 a.m. feeling. So that, for me, that point where you wake up in the middle of the night and suddenly know you're going to die. Maybe not right there and then, but that kind of realization of finiteness and of being alive, but also knowing that you will die. And I started researching around that subject, and what I sort of came to was I really wanted this opportunity to have a conversation about my own death with someone. So I think there are spaces to talk about bereavement or the death of others, but I couldn't really find this thing I was looking for. In my mind, the kind of future of this work would be that it does exist as this kind of civic service, that there is a manned telephone number that operates that you can call to talk about your own death. And so as part of the research for this work, I started asking to meet different people working in the death and dying industry. A real varied ragtag of people, from an academic, a kind of very eminent academic working in death and dying, who most people call Dr. Death, who rocked up with like skull rings and told me he grew up in a funeral home, to an embalmer who worked in the 80s as part of a campaign to allow people who were dying or had died of HIV and AIDS to be embalmed, so that they could have public funerals. To doctors, nurses, a nurse who was working in intensive care on a study about near-death experience in people in intensive care. So yeah, a whole range of people who had a really kind of first-hand, up-close relationship with someone as they were dying. And so really the work was about how to cut out the middleman, I found those conversations so inspiring that that's what I wanted the work to be. And I think often in one-to-one work or in my work in general, I'm looking for like minimalism or like economy. What's the least I can do to communicate this idea? And so the work really became these conversations. The work was also important. It's important to say that the work was cited, so it wasn't happening in theatres. One-to-one work often isn't. The first time I showed this work, it was in an empty shop, and I really loved that because it was on the high street, which is kind of where I'd like these conversations to sit. I've also performed it in a hotel, in kind of a very bland corporate meeting room, in these kind of, yeah, civic spaces. And I think when you're making one-to-one work, your site is already adding such kind of narrative and atmosphere to your work. And in this work, there were other things that I paid attention to. So colour and feel of the room, and also smell. So you can see in this image here, they're lilies, which if they're left in the room for long enough, really give this kind of particular, yeah, there's a kind of resonance that we have with lilies and death. And that's an image of when we did it in the shop front and the hotel. Okay, yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Jo. I'm just working out how to bring myself back into the picture. Pew, pew. You don't need me. So I saw this work, I think, in a hotel overlooking Castle Park. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, in the Marriott Hotel in Bristol. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really remember the atmosphere of being in this like weird liminal space of a hotel room, which is such a transient space, which people pass through all the time. And so in Deadline, it's very clear that the kind of the space has a and if the space is really important to the work. And just before I ask the next question, I just want to say I'm going to ask a question, and then other people are very welcome to ask questions. So if you want to drop a question in the chat, then where we'll try and get to those. So I just wanted to ask, in exposure, I want to ask about theatricality and to what extent the conditions of the space play a part in the way the piece functions, and why the piece kind of happens in a controlled space rather than a site-specific kind of space.
Yeah. Well, really with that work, I mean, I'm so specific. The tech rider for that work now has a sentence in it because I asked for a room that can achieve a total blackout, and through touring this work hundreds of times, it turns out there's a real range in what people understand as dark. So now there's a note in the tech rider that says, sit in the room after you've made it dark, sit in it for 5 minutes, put your hand in front of your face, and if you can't see your hand, congratulations, the room is dark enough. So in some ways the work's very simple in that that's what it mainly needs. It needs no light, because actually our eyes are incredible and they can pick up the smallest bit of light. And I think what's operating in that work is some kind of, again, a kind of liminalness of total proximity, because you can sense our two bodies together, but also because the work is happening in your head essentially through the earphones, it's also happening on a kind of different spatial, I don't know, plane. So yeah, though I still think of that work as sighted, because the room feeling quiet, the room feeling safe, and the room being dark enough are very strict parameters for the work. And yeah, I think that is something. I mean, I was really interested hearing Rosana talk about that kind of unpredictability of public space, and I think, yeah, I think those works and my work in general is much more specific control or something, in order to let a kind of unpredictability happen within it.
Harry's asking, both Rosana and Jo mentioned re-examining how we look or see each other / ourselves. Why do you think intimate one-to-one performance is a good form to examine how we look or see each other or ourselves? It's quite a big question, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, straight after I made Exposure, I made a kind of theatre piece, because I was curious about whether it was too easy to create intimacy in a one-to-one, because I think it does lean towards you're with another person and you're looking at each other often, and that creates a kind of bond or tension between you. Yeah, I don't think it is the only way, but I think that it's unavoidable in one-to-one work. So if you don't want that kind of level of connection or intimacy, you have to work much harder against it. You have to really consider it. I don't know what Rosana would say, but yeah.
We can find out once you've all spoken. I'm just going to ask a really quick question, which I think is really interesting. Alice is asking, in Deadline, the conversations were over a telephone, and you were speaking to an expert in death, but was your voice in there too? And how was your artistic input performed in how it was edited? I guess the question is around your role as an artist and whether or not you felt like you needed to be in that piece explicitly.
Yeah, I for one version I was, because there's a not voicemail, like a introduction when you answer the phone, and that's quite kind of designed, and for a while that voice was mine, and then it became a performer that I asked to do it. To me it wasn't at all important. I mean, it's my artistic work or labor is in all the choices of the work, so it's about who those specialists are. I mean, they were kind of not scripted conversations, but they were kind of quite carefully structured. So a lot of my work happened in preparing those specialists to hold that space for an audience member. And then, yeah, I mean, I think my practice slips around between kind of visual art and performance and choreography. I think some of my kind of input was about the aesthetics and the feel of that space, the smell of it, the kind of tone of it, rather than, yeah, performing in the work.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've just realized that I've selected 3 artists who don't necessarily perform in the encounters that they're making. And yeah, I think my expectation is that the people who apply for the commission that we've got will be performing in their work. So I don't really know how that's happened, but it's good to hear that kind of described about your role in it as an artist. Thanks, Jo. I'm going to move on to Tania. So just give me a moment. I'm going to unspotlight you. So Tania El Khoury is a live artist whose work focuses on audience interactivity and is concerned with the ethical and political potential of such encounters. She creates installations and performances in which the audience is an active collaborator. Tania's work has been translated to multiple languages and shown in 32 countries across 6 continents in spaces ranging from museums to cable cars. She is a 2019 Soros Art Fellow and the recipient of the Betty's Outstanding Production Award, the International Live Art Prize, the Total Theatre Innovation Award, and the Arches Brick Award. And if you just give me a moment, I'm going to find Tania's. There we go. I'm going to add Tania to the spotlights, and there we are. Tania, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike, for inviting me for such an exciting event and to be amongst these wonderful artists that I also find quite inspiring, Jo and Rosana. For all the other artists and participants, first, thank you for listening to us. But please use our event here to ask whatever questions that might be helpful for you. Even if it can sound embarrassing at first. So I just want to say that I feel that I've always been interested in intimacy as a radical space to share human vulnerability and share knowledge. I've created a number of one-on-one performances that you can find online, read about, or watch videos of. But I just want to give you a little selection just to give you an idea of these various pieces. In 2010, I created a piece called Jaride One-on-One, which is a secret encounter in a public cafe between myself and an audience, one audience member at a time. Together, we are on a mission to spot the potential terrorists in a public space. And that was based on the actual Metropolitan Police reports for public spaces in London about how to spot terrorists. The piece was partly a fun game, like kind of playing on a spy movie aesthetics, but has clearly dark political connotations.
Pull yourself a little. I've got
someone needs to be muted. I guess it's Vanessa. It has some dark political connotation, revealing prejudice and racial profiling. In 2011, I created a piece called Maybe If You Choreograph Me, You Will Feel Better. That one did quite well. It won 2 Edinburgh Awards. It was meant to travel the world. It did so for about a year, and then I had to stop performing it because it was simply too depressing for me. I can tell you later about it, more in the Q&A, but this Q&A. But this one was open only for self-identifying men to watch it. The premise is that the men watch it from a window, and me, the performer, a woman passing under their window, and almost like a video game, they need to create that passing of a woman under the window. So who am I? What's my name? Where am I going? What am I wearing? What am I feeling, etc. So giving total control of that person over my body in the public space. And we can talk about the stakes, how high those stakes are. And I love that Rosana mentioned already that actually when working with a public space, you're working with a huge beast that you can't control. And you're working with audience, with passers-by who become accidental audience. A more recent work that I've been touring since 2016, and one of the pieces that are most dear to my heart is called As Far As My Fingertips Take Me. Some of you may have encountered it because it toured quite a bit. This is an encounter through a gallery wall between one audience member and a refugee who is artist Bassel Zara, a musician now based in Birmingham, and was born a Palestinian refugee in Yarmouk camp in Syria. So the premise is that an audience is invited to sit on a chair in front of a gallery wall and place their arm into a hole in that wall. On the other side, Bassel touches their arm and draws like paints on their arm. They don't see each other, but they have that very intimate tactile encounter. I can talk forever about why these pieces seem to have touched people deeply, and how did they did so. This is something that I reflect a lot about, especially about maybe as far as my fingertips take me, because it's actually a 10 minutes piece. And it was just a concept that I had. I I didn't tell a lot of people about that, but I actually dreamt about it. I dreamt about this just as is, a gallery wall, hall, stick your arm, tarara. So it was quite quick to make, and it's quite quick to perform. It's 10 minutes, but people have talked about it as if it's an experience that is life-changing, that it stays with you for a very long time. Someone told me that it's a 10-minute piece that stayed on their body for 2 weeks, and that's apparently because they tried not to shower for 2 weeks, or they showered like that. And a few people actually contacted us to get consent on whether they can tattoo it, and I've seen one person who actually had tattooed it on their arm. So beyond these various pieces, I think that one-on-one become a methodology for me, a methodology of work that I use even in pieces that are not one-on-one. For example, in another piece that toured a lot since 2014 called God and Speak. This is an interactive sound installation based on 10 oral histories from Syria about people who were killed at the beginning of the Syrian uprising and were buried in gardens. The actual piece invites 10 audience members to walk into a space where 4 tons of soil is there, and 10 different speakers buried in that soil, each telling the story of one of the 10 deceased. The audience is invited to walk on that soil, dig with their hands, listen to the story, get to the sound source, listen to the story, and then bury it back. So while this is a 10 people piece, I very much think about it as a one-on-one, because it's about you as an audience member creating this intimate encounter with someone who is no longer with us, who is made absent. And that encounter with a person who has been killed is no longer present. So the presence of their absence really is, for me, there's a lot of like political potential in that realization and in that encounter. I've also used that one-on-one methodology even in research. For example, when conducting oral history interview, which I do quite a lot. I did it for God and Speak in order to tell these stories, but also in other pieces. I use that one-on-one performance methodology in conducting this oral history interview. And that's about understanding that each encounter is totally different, and about taking the person in front of you very seriously as a political person, as a political body with their own traumas, their own interests, their own histories, their own past and present. For me, when it works one-on-one and all interactive performance is a perfect balance between control and randomness. We can talk about control as the script, the dramaturgy, the design that the artist has conceptualized, and randomness is that person facing you with all their flows and fears and desires. I'd say for the purpose of this event and inspiring artists, and perhaps artists who work in drag and who would like to work or test working in intimate performance, I want to leave you with 3 things. First, for artists who work with spectacular aesthetics, you might think that intimate one-on-one is always linked to more kind of quiet aesthetics. In reality, it doesn't need to be. You can take from one-on-one form whatever you like. That's why I wanted to tell you from the beginning that I actually look at it as a methodology of work. For example, one of the other artists' work that come to mind now is Elie Dubois' Ringside, if you've seen it, and that's a one-on-one between an audience and a circus dancer, and circus is quite big. It uses grand aesthetics, and it worked really well because it was actually this contradiction between the very intimate encounter and the bigger aesthetics and a bigger form. And most importantly, the second thing is there are no rules. So live art is a form that is always evolving, and it is us who evolve it. So while you should learn about others and be inspired, you need to create your own form that works with your concept, works with your political motivation. And I just want to advise whoever's working with that on thinking about the political and ethical potential of an intimate encounter with the audience. So always ask yourself who my audience is. Do they feel welcome to this place? Do they have agency? Does it matter who they are? Or is it just about them being a person? Are they being erased? I think people expect to be seen when they are alone with you in a space. Just like you expect anonymity in a big crowd in a theater, you're expected to be seen when you're alone in front of an artist. And that is different from treating them in a special consumerist way. You know, it's about you feeling special and feeding into this, the notion of narcissistic audience that some academic have written about. This is about allowing them a space in which their politics can exist. And also challenged. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tania. So if anybody has any questions for Tania, then please chip in. But I'm just going to ask, with the As Far As My Fingers Can Take Me work, it's an encounter through a gallery wall between an audience member and a refugee. Their fingertips touch without seeing each other, and the audience will listen to those who've recently challenged border discrimination. And my question is, why was the one-to-one the right format for telling this particular story, and why did you choose to present the work in that way?
I think, I mean, it was from the beginning, the idea came to me as a one-on-one experience. And I think because it was about actually touching and about this horizontal relationship. So there is a wall and there is one audience member and one refugee, the artist. So it's about kind of balancing that that power and that relationship. For example, if you come to that space, you see the audience member sitting, wearing white and sitting on that wall, and they're under the spotlight, and Basil on the other side is actually hidden and doing his thing. So in a way, it's about exposing rather than kind of exposing the refugee and putting them in a position where they feel completely exposed and completely made vulnerable again. It's about actually exposing the audience and allowing them to face their own privilege, face their own politics, face their own responsibility towards that story.
Great. So I'm just gonna check in. Paul, are you okay? Paul looks okay. Thank you so much to all the artists who've spoken, and to Contact and Islington Mill for their support in presenting the talk. We hope that you've been inspired by what you've heard. We're now going to briefly introduce our intimate performance commissions, but before that, we're going to do a general Q&A with all of the artists. So if you can bear with me a moment, I'm going to find and spotlight everyone. Here we go. Yeah, so this is everyone. Pelin has been collecting your responses in a Google document over here somewhere. And I'm going to ask you to sort of have a conversation between yourselves about things. So anybody particularly wants to answer a question, feel free to chip in. So a question to all three of you, just to start. There's a notion that performance art or art in general addresses a specific group or bubble, and something around how your work overcomes the borders of a specific art audience and gets beyond that. I don't know if anybody has anything to say about that idea of your work reaching beyond, or one-to-one work reaching beyond a kind of typical arts audience.
I can respond. Yeah, I think, as I was saying, I think I always have this question around like who's the work for, and I'm aware of certain bubbles that form, and that sometimes those bubbles are really important for people, but I am kind of interested in reaching different kinds of people with my work as well. And I think with Walking Holding specifically, the idea is to bring a variety of people to be involved in it, and those people aren't performers or part of the performance community. I think there was another question about how we find performers, but that's done in collaboration with the local organisation that we work with. So that naturally kind of brings different kinds of people into it through kind of various call out avenues and things like that. But I think one-on-one performance, whilst it can seem in some ways something that's very daunting, it does really have potential to reach different kinds of people, because you can frame it in different ways, and some people want to do that and some people don't, and that's fine. But what I've found with Walking Holding is yeah, I've sort of done it in contexts that definitely aren't performance art contexts at all, and it can you can also talk about it as like an alternative walk or something like that. When you say it's a performance, people get a bit confused. So I think, yeah, there's ways of talking about the work that can bring different kinds of people in, but because it is this kind of encounter rather than going into a theatre or something, it really has potential to be open to different people. And just one other thing on that is, I also did realise that a lot of people will never come to it because it's quite scary. So I decided to make a film about it, really with the intention of trying to open it up to different people.
Yeah, I'm trying to view a Google document while I was also having a conversation. I just want to, the reason that Submerge has really brought you together to talk about this, and also to attempt to work with people who might not have made a one-to-one before, is because I've had so many amazing one-to-one performances which have really changed my life. But I've also had some really like problematic one-to-one performances where perhaps I felt like I needed to perform in a certain way or do something that I wasn't comfortable with doing. And earlier on, somebody asked something about consent and how you know that there's consent in the work for what's about to happen to an audience member. I just wondered if anybody wanted to talk about that in relation to their work.
Yeah, I can have a go. I think it's very important for me to actually open a space where audience feel that they have agency, so they're not kind of blindly led into a whole experience. Someone here, I think Eva, talked about antagonism. Actually, it's interesting that she mentioned politics and antagonism in relation to my work. It's actually the opposite. It's politics and antagonism are not necessarily the same thing. I personally think that we could ask very difficult political questions while remaining a space that is very much about shared human empathy and shared vulnerability and shared care. And I'm really interested in that feminist shared care between us and the audience and each other, and actually starting from the position that we think that we're on the same side and that we're all suffering in a way or another, and we're kind of supporting each other, but continue to ask difficult questions and perhaps push each other into thinking about our own responsibility and our own positionality, our own privilege, etc. So how do I go about it? For example, in Garden Speak, because it can be it can feel overwhelming for people who might have, for example, have lost someone recently, or just because it's about death. It's there is an audience guide that's very much in how they are giving the instruction from the beginning is very much about this is an invitation rather than it's a rule. So we invite you to go in, we invite you to take off your shoes and walk in and see that, giving them a sense that perhaps if they don't want to do that, they can do something else, but they're not going to be kicked out and treated like, you know, bad audience. You know, that also a lot of really interesting academic work have written about the good audience in interactive performance, because people, they walk in and will be, I want to do my best, I want to be the good audience, so they just do whatever you ask them to do without really kind of thinking for themselves whether this is something that they would like to do or not. So working around that and taking that into consideration is very, very important for me, and I've managed it through audience guides, through how you give instructions. Yeah.
Thanks, Tania. Question for Jo. Jo, what would you want the participant to take away from the performance, if anything? And do you take control of that, or do you let them come to their own conclusions?
Well, I think it kind of feeds into that last question. I was thinking a lot about the kind of balancing act of proposing something and kind of offering an experience or an opportunity, but that might have mysterious elements to it. So you might know, for instance, in Deadline, that this is a work about death and dying and it involves a phone call. And there's a kind of border or gateway there that as an audience you have to decide to cross. And like Tania said, I think I mitigate those kind of borders of consent around how, yeah, the tone of voice, the way you're spoken to, the instructions, the kind of freedom within that, even the freedom within quite a controlled experience. So I've forgotten the actual question you asked me because I was thinking about consent. It was about, oh, whether the kind of result is decided. So I think it's a balance really between a kind of intention and then freedom to respond in the way that the audience feels the work. So even within exposure, we have the work culminates where the lights come on and we look at each other as the final thing that happens in the work. And whilst you can categorize all of those experiences as looks between two people, a huge range of things happens in those gazes, non-verbal, unspoken, but they're different each time. And yeah, I don't always know what's happening for that audience member in that moment. There's some similarities in responses to the work, but I think, yeah, I mean, if I wanted to give a very clear message, maybe I'd write essays or something. I wouldn't make a one-to-one work.
Thanks, Jo. I've got two more questions. The first one is general, which is, how are you negotiating COVID in your work? Are you still working / making? Has it created any specific possibilities or opportunities in your work? And then the funny bit, which is, I guess my question is, how would you approach this commission?
I could say, I don't know how to approach this commission. I'm afraid that's up to you to figure out, and me, because I'll be mentoring as best I can. But in terms of COVID, I mean, on the one hand, I'm just like not touring, my life's changed in quite a big way. But I made a piece of work called Absent Tense, which was released through Home in Manchester, an online work which took the form of a audio work. It exists in multiple formats, but at its heart is an audio work. And I guess I was thinking about podcasts. I haven't made a podcast, I promise. But about, in my experience of COVID, I've wanted a kind of companionship, which I think for me, this kind of one-to-one of a voice in your ear can answer.
Thanks. And does anybody else want to talk about the impact of COVID on their work? You don't have to. No. Oh, maybe.
I'd say just it's obvious that it actually threatened the very nature of our work. and it's quite scary for everyone working with live event and live work. It has, for me, opened opportunities for us to reassess our ways of working. And working online, for example, has the capability, it can be more inclusive for people who cannot afford to go to these spaces or don't live in metropolitan cities. So I hope that this is actually an opportunity for us to take some of the good things about working online and working differently post-pandemic.
And just because this commission is about what intimate performance can we make whilst keeping each other safe and following the rules, I want to just ignore that for a moment and talk about the old times, which is, before you all go and we finish this kind of artist talk section, in the order that you spoke, which was Rosana, Jo, Tania, tell me about a memorable or favorite one-to-one performance that you experienced that you thought was really great. And that's where we'll close the talk.
Well, I was just going to say that this isn't like the best one-to-one performance I've ever seen or anything, but actually something happened in COVID times, which was I was the recipient of like a personalized performance over Zoom, and it was actually just as part of a New Year's party thing that Scotty was doing, because he normally does like a big New Year's Eve party, and then it was like you could apply to have a kind of party made for you at your house. And Carl Taylor, a friend, had applied to do this thing, and it ended up Carl couldn't even be in our house, but we didn't really know what it was going to be, but they just said log into Zoom at 8 o'clock. And this performance had been very specially made specifically for Ivor, my partner. And I was kind of blown away by it, and I just felt like there's in this time when we are basically, a lot of us, confined to our houses, for someone to kind of really know something about you and think about you and then make something that is especially for you, just felt very special, and one of the most exciting things that has happened to me over Zoom. So
thanks, Rosana. What about you, Jo?
I don't know why it came to mind, but I'm just going to go with it. It was a piece by an artist called Francesca Steele. She was presenting at the very last National Review of Live Art in Glasgow. And I can't remember lots of what happened in the one-to-one, but what I remember, so at the time she had a practice of bodybuilding. So she was sort of drastically reimagining and training her body to be this very muscular, very hard body. And what I remember is being invited to stand very close to her body, like almost chest to chest. And what I remember is seeing or feeling the kind of steam from her torso, because she'd been working, I don't know how many of these she'd already done. And she was kind of doing the flexing thing. And I guess I remember, and I guess that's what I'm excited about in one-to-one work, is the other senses that can be pulled into that experience, the kind of physical, the smell of sweat, the kind of feel of someone else's body heat.
Thanks, Jo. I remember in an Entre and Goed piece, which I'm definitely not pronouncing correctly, being tied up in a wheelchair and wheeled around Bristol Vic in a blindfold. And there was a moment in that piece where I was lifted out of the chair, spun around by a performer and pushed into a wall quite physically. And it just felt so physical, and I could smell them, and it was so exciting. And I honestly don't know how they allowed that to happen, but it was so good. Tania.
I think they can't talk about one-on-one without mentioning the late Adrian Howells, and how we also have to kind of, for younger artists, to study his wonderful work and how much he taught us about intimacy and actually shared care, because he created work just with the notion of caring for the audience, and he left us with a great body of work. And for a more contemporary, still living, and hopefully for a very long time, is our friend Brian LaBelle. I'd like to give him as an example, just because he uses pop things like the sitcom Sex and the City to create very caring and intimate pieces. Like the last one, I forgot the name of it. Like sentences repeated 3 times. God, you must forgive me.
You have to forgive me.
You have to forgive me. Yeah. It's a wonderful piece, and it's great to see as an inspiring example of working with one-on-one.
Thanks, Tanya. Adrian actually gave me a bath at Battersea Arts Centre. And so I put on a dressing gown, I entered the space, and he was there, and he gave me a bath, and he asked consent, like, can I wash you? Can I hold you? He dried me, he fed me chocolate, and then he asked, can I hold you? And gave me this long, deep cuddle. And it's so moving, and one of the most amazing things I've ever experienced. And I think those kinds of encounters have really like ignited my passion for one-to-one. And so I think one-to-one doesn't have to be all touchy-feely and super intimate, but when it is, it can be incredible. But as we've seen, there are loads of different ways of creating a one-to-one encounter. I want to thank you all for speaking. That was pretty brilliant. And I want to thank Contact. And I want to thank Contact and Islington Mill for their support in presenting the talk. And we're gonna take I feel like we need to take a couple of minutes, like 3 minutes, just to have a little pause while we all log off and whatever. But then I'm gonna answer some questions about the intimate performance commissions that we're offering. So if anybody's got any specific questions, now is the time to think about them. I'm on hand to answer them. We'll briefly introduce you to what we're doing, and then people can ask questions. But thank you to all of our artists, and thank you to Contact, and thank you to Islington Mill. And anybody who's not interested in applying for an intimate performance commission, now is your time to go and get a gin and tonic. I finished mine. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.